Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon. Welcome to, wow, a Speeduino stream. Haven't had one of these in a very long time. Hopefully everyone can hear me. Please do let me know in the chat if I'm not loud enough or anything like that. It's been a pretty long while since I've done one of these streams, so had to figure it all out again. Had to set everything back up. So yeah, it's been a bit of a relearning experience for me to figure out how to do all of this again. But yeah, good to be doing these again. So I made a video a couple of weeks ago now, and sort of so many people have asked, "Hey, when are you doing the live streams again?" I'm like, well, I don't know. I didn't really feel like I didn't really know that there was that much interest out there in them. So it's great that people are watching, that people want to see it, and I'm really stoked for that. Cool. Oh, I just realised that I'm showing my screen there. I was watching chat. I haven't figured out a good way to sort of watch the chat window at the same time as doing other things. So hopefully we can figure that out as we go. Cool. All right. So look, what I wanted to talk about today was just, what's going on in the Speeduino world, what I've been working on, what it is that I do for Speeduino, not just the firmware side, but the hardware side and all the little related projects on the side of it. But mostly what I'm going to be talking about is a little bit of hardware and a cool little sort of side project that that comes off that hardware that hopefully will be relevant to both my own hardware projects and overall Speeduino in the future. Cool. Glad you can hear, Ali. All right, let me just try and catch up on chat. Wow, some familiar names in there. Good to see you guys. All right, so first thing I want to say, there was a fix pack release that I put out just a couple of days ago. If you haven't seen this one yet, please go have a look at it, particularly if you're running the February 2024 firmware. I would highly recommend you go grab that one. It's got a couple of pretty crucial fixes in it. You might not be using some of these features, and that's fine. But if you are, particularly if you're impacted by some of the conditions on these, I would strongly recommend you you go and have a look at that one and update it. There's no new INI file that you have to load. There's no changes to your tune or anything like that. You can just load it straight in over the top of your February 2024 release, and you're good to go. Cool. All right. What I mainly wanted to be talking about today was a little bit of hardware. So let's see if we can figure out how to make this happen. I've got a whole bunch of things that I've now got connected to this PC. So I've got a new oscilloscope a little while ago, and I've got a little side display viewer here, so I can do crazy things like bring up a video feed from the scope, in case we ever want to talk about RGStim type things and have a look at what outputs are doing. But more relevant for now is this, and I'm going to show this fella here. Now, it's a little bit dark there. I wonder if we can get some more light. Basically, this is a beta version of the DropBear V2, which is something I've been working on for a little while. Let me see it all. So look, the story of the DropBear, most of you probably are at least a little bit aware of this. There was a lot of research and development from my side put into it a little while ago. Basically, there was one large size production run done of it before I got hit by the chip shortage, and it really seriously put a dent in everything that happened with the DropBear, which was a real pain. So this is the DropBear V2, which is an attempt to make something that is sort of more easily produced in terms of chips, but also add a few bits and pieces of new features. One of the things that was a victim of the chip shortage, unfortunately, was the Teensy 3.5, which was the microcontroller board that the DropBear V1 used. It's end of life. You can't get those anymore, and if you can, they're just sort of a couple that somebody might have happened to have in supply at the time. However, they are not going to be produced anymore. The chips, the main processor for them is not available. It's not going to be available anytime soon. So what this meant is that I've needed to have a bit of a rethink around what we're doing hardware-wise. So this instead moves to the Teensy 4.1, which is physically the same in terms of the pin layout. Now, let's have a bit of a closer look here. It's a little bit dark, isn't it? That's all right. You can probably see. So yeah, the Teensy itself is physically the same in terms of a pinout. Now that's this board along here. So physically the same, electrically mostly the same in terms of a pinout. Unfortunately not absolutely the same, which sort of meant that a redesign was going to be required of the whole board. But it also is quite a different chip to what was used on the Teensy 3.5. Quite a few years ago, I made a sort of just a bit of a joke video about, you know, the world's fastest ECU, and it was using one of these Teensy 4.1 boards, just plugged straight into a drop bear. So some things worked, most things worked, but some things didn't because of the pinning compatibility. But you know, these are a 600 megahertz microprocessor, insanely fast, way faster than is actually needed for an ECU. But with the 3.5 becoming unavailable, 3.5 and 3.6 for what it's worth, they're both in the same boat as far as availability goes. This was really the only option that was left on the table for pin compatibility. I really like the Teensy platform and the family of chips. I find it to be incredibly reliable, incredibly well sorted. I know a lot of people out there love the STM32, and that's, yeah, that's fine. It's not my thing. I've tried it. I've had a lot of frustrations with STM32. So look, I'm happy to help support it, but it's probably not something that I'm going to use in my boards, not anytime soon anyway. That said, the original prototype drop bear unit did have an STM32 in it, and I switched afterwards. So that's the big change. Now, obviously, that's meant that there needed to be quite a number of circuit changes to accommodate the Teensy 3.5. Sorry, the Teensy 4.1 itself, just in terms of the pin compatibility. But otherwise, this is largely the same board. The power supply has changed a little bit. So what I'm going to do is sort of alternate here between looking at the board physically and having a look at some schematics for it. So let's have a look at the power regulator. So in the last version, the Drop Bear V1, I was using what's called a system integration chip, which was an MC3314, and I'd used that chip for a long time. It's, when we could say a system integration chip, it combines a bunch of automotive related things together and puts them all on one chip. So it had dual voltage regulators, it had multiple injector outputs, multiple relay outputs, you know, hardware watchdog and things like that built into it. It was a nice little chip. But it, one, was quite expensive, and two, had been increasingly becoming less available as well. So I've switched to something that is a much more standardized voltage regulator for this. Takes up a little bit more board real estate and things like that. But it's a sort of simpler design, slightly cheaper to produce in terms of the actual components, and does a really good job. Why don't you just go with an STM32 when you did the redesign? What are the main benefits of Teensy over the STM32? Great question. Look, not a lot from a purely hardware perspective. The STM32 and the Teensy both do roughly the same. In terms of a Teensy 3.5, that would be. Teensy 4.1 is just insanely fast for a microprocessor. We don't need that speed, but yeah, it's kind of nice to have, I suppose. The problem, STM32. Okay, my sort of experience with it is that compared to other microprocessors around, and certainly the Teensies, the library support was just atrocious. I see that it's a lot better now, but 4 or 5 years ago when I was playing with potentially using an STM32, the libraries were just atrociously bad. They were buggy, they kept changing their interfaces. Every new version that came out, you were recoding everything just to make it rework. They were incredibly buggy, they were very slow in some instances. And, you know, I guess I got a little bit burned by that at the time. It was just an incredibly frustrating thing to have to deal with. That said, I think their hardware was a little bit limited at the time too. You know, most of what we've looked at with Speeduino for the STM32 has been the STM32F4 family. And there's a few in there that are supported, and that's fine. They're great. They, again, just have some interesting hardware decisions on them. The biggest hardware limitation I've seen on that F family has been around some of the design choices that were made in the SD card implementation in terms of buffer sizes and things like that. From what I've seen, and I haven't played with one, I've only looked at the specs and looked at the data sheets, the STM32H family is really nice. That could be one that I look at seriously again in the future. The software libraries seem to have settled down a little bit. So that one, you know, I think that isn't quite as much of an issue anymore. Certainly we don't seem to be having to change the STM32 core of Speeduino every month or two when new things come out, or when new versions of the libraries come out. So, you know, maybe in the future, I wouldn't rule it out for that maybe STM32H line. But for this one, all of the work had been done around the Teensy. I didn't want to start from scratch again with the V2. I wanted to make something that was workable with new hardware, or with the available hardware, with minimal effort, but with a couple of nice advantages or a couple of nice new additions as well. So, you know, that's my experience with the STM32. It's not everyone's. I know there's a big following of STM32 within the Speeduino community out there. That's fine, right? I'm happy to help with the support for the core. It seems to be working reasonably well now. I got no problems adding it and keeping it in Speeduino. That's fine. But for me, it's just not been my preference. Let me just have a look at chat. Detonation, good question. Is there any chance the STM32 firmware could ever be loaded via Speedy Loader? Yes, I have a version of Speedy Loader already that does exactly that. It's specific to the one family, the STM32 Black F40, 406, 407, I can't remember now, specific to that board, but I just need to sit down and basically get that one ready to go. And yeah, that one will definitely be possible. So there's not a new build of Speedy Loader yet with that in it. I can't even remember if I've even committed that onto GitHub at the moment, but it does exist. It is out there. What I have been doing, for what it's worth, is the last few releases I've been building the firmware and uploading them to the Speeduino server for the STM32 boards as well. So as soon as that version of Speedy Loader goes live, there will be pre-compiled versions of the firmware there ready to go for it. So yeah, that will be coming. Maybe I'll have a look at it this week. I had forgotten about that one a little while ago. I got working on Argustim for a little while, and kind of forgot about Speedy Loader. But yeah, that's in there today. It works. It's maybe a bit rough around the edges in terms of, you know, error handling and that sort of thing if a firmware burn doesn't work the first time, but it's there. It works. If you want to have a play with it, let me make sure it's all committed up on GitHub. Let's have a look. Let's have a look together, actually. Did I even commit it? What is my memory like? Did I put it up or not? There you go. Initial edition of STM32F407 uploads. So yeah, it is there. It just hasn't been made part of a release yet. When did I do that? That was about, yeah, okay, back in Feb. Cool. Yeah, so that will be there. Let me tidy off the corners of that one, and I'll get it ready to go. Okay, and yeah, look, as you say, a lot of people are using STM32F407s out there. That's fine. I love it. I love to see it. No problems with it at all. Happy to help support it. It's just not been my personal preference up to this point. Now that may change again in the future, but great to see it happening, and I'm more than happy to help support it where I can. Speeduino, probably a topic for another day. I did actually pull out my old Speeduino set up a couple of weeks ago and started having a play again, but I haven't sunk a lot of time into it. You might be starting to get the impression that there's a lot of pieces in the Speeduino world, and you'd be right. 80% of my time in general, I say, goes onto the main firmware, with the other maybe 10 or 15% being hardware, and then everything else around it, Speedy Loader, Argistim, all the other little side projects and things. I've kind of taken a little bit of a break on the firmware since the last, since the February 2024 release came out. I wasn't burned out on the firmware exactly, but I just kind of needed a bit of a change of pace. So I've been tackling a few other little bits and pieces since then. Argistim was the first. I really wanted to get a nice version of Argistim out, and I'm super happy with that. I know it's a niche product. It's not going to be something that everybody needs or can get use out of it. I get it, but it is absolutely part of my workflow, and I know a lot of other people use it as well. So it's something that's super critical, and I really like where that's gotten to at the moment. It's a really nice product now, so I'm pretty happy with that one. Okay, let's get back to some drop bear stuff for the moment. So as I said, mostly it is the same. We do have a couple of other little bits and pieces that are different. If I flick back to here, what can I show that's different? So all of the analog circuits did have to get shuffled around quite a lot, because of the different pin layouts on the Teensy 4.1. So they moved from being in sort of these pins here to further down, more about here, and a couple over the other side. Annoying to work around, but not a big change. You may notice that there's a much bigger battery on there now, which is good. The RTC clock battery that was on the Drop Bear V1 was tiny. It lasted sort of maybe a month, 3 or 4 weeks. So if you weren't using the car regularly, it would be discharging pretty quickly. It does. These are chargeable batteries, by the way. They charge whenever the car is running. So as long as you were using your car, that was fine. But the bigger battery here is quite nice. I'm trying to remember what that battery is. That is no, I can't remember the battery size off the top of my head that I'm using now, but a much bigger one. I can only estimate here because I haven't run it out for the full time, so I can only estimate based on the drain I see, but I estimate that these batteries would last about 12 months. Assuming no driving. If you drive, you'll be fine. It'll charge back up and you'll be good to go. Let me just check the chat again. Rollout plan for the Drop Bear V2. I will get to that when I finish actually talking about it. Oh, Samuel W. Great question. Are the older boards considered end of life? No, absolutely not. One of the things I am super committed to is making sure that the existing family of boards is absolutely continued to be supported. There may be hardware limitations that they run into at some point. But at the moment, no, they get basically all of the features of the STM32 and the Teensies. The exception being one, SD logging is not available on the older ones. CAN is not available on the mega boards, and they are limited to a total of 9 fuel and ignition channels. So they are reconfigurable at compile time, but you can only have a total of 9, whereas the drop bear and the STM32 are 8 and 8, so 16 is fine for them. So you can run full sequential on an 8-cylinder engine. But no, absolutely they're supported, and will continue to be supported for the foreseeable future. Can we move on the IDC40? People can get a 40 up. Yeah, okay. The IDC40, let me tell you the story behind that one. When I originally made the V4 board, which 2015-ish roughly, so nearly 10 years ago, wow. The idea behind that was to never use those pins directly. That the V0.4 was to be a baseboard, and that anything that you used with it would be via an adapter board. So you would make an adapter board that plugged in on top of your V4 to whatever connector you happen to need in your particular board. It never really worked out, to be honest, and most people I see tend to just use the IDC40 connector itself directly. Yeah, maybe it's time to move on. But that was sort of the background about why that exists, and that's why it was done. Okay, so yeah, this is the Drop Bear V2. I just realized I've got it upside down, so you can't even see the text on it. How terrible of that is, of me is that. But otherwise, this is largely the same. So can we see, in terms of the circuits themselves, the power side is over here. So the updated power circuits are down here. A couple of extra ICs in there for new outputs that were used to be done by the system integration chip. And the only other, or it still uses the same nifty little map card, and I really like this. I'm happy for other people to use it in their designs as well, if anybody wants to see that. These are basically a little pluggable map sensor card, so you can switch out between different sensors if you change your boost level and that sort of thing. That's worked really nicely. I've been super happy with that part of the design. The pin out for these, by the way, is identical to the Drop Bear V1, so no changes required there. You can unplug a V1 Drop Bear board, plug one of these in, and it will just work absolutely fine. The biggest change though, and something that it's been a kind of a personal interest project for me, I guess a little bit, but I think it is quite useful and I'm pretty excited by it, is, let me just move it up in this corner. There's the existing stepper driver board socket here, but there's also an additional socket over here, and there's a slightly different number of pins, so you can't plug one into the wrong one, which is good. But that socket there replaces the serial comms header that the Drop Bear V1 had in the past. So for interfacing with other systems via serial, the Drop Bear V1 just had a simple serial breakout. So you got your power lines, ground and power, as well as a serial receive and transmit. Very, very simple. If you wanted to use it, you could. Most people didn't, and there wasn't a lot of point to it. This has those lines on it as well, so you can tap into those lines if you just simply want to use a basic serial line there as well. But the intent of it is to be used with, let me just take that out of the way for a second, one of these. Now that is a really, really small little board. Let me for comparison, There's an Arduino Mega beside it. So it is a tiny, tiny, tiny little board. It's an ESP32 C3 based board called a Super Mini. Good name given the size. Okay. Yep, and it is Super Mini, as the name suggests. What this is a Wi-Fi and Bluetooth board all in one. So it plugs straight onto that socket that I mentioned on the Dropbear V2 and adds Bluetooth and Wi-Fi capability straight onto the board. Unfortunately, the downside of this is that it does only support Bluetooth BLE rather than Bluetooth Classic. So whatever application you're interfacing with does need to support Bluetooth BLE. The flip side of that, though, the positive of BLE, is that Bluetooth BLE is supported on iOS and iPhone devices. So you can actually connect via an application like RealDash, an app such as RealDash, sorry, on an iPhone, and it will connect via this to the Dropbear V2, no worries. And I have that up and running already today. So it's a nice, handy little interface. It gives a nice, simple way of passing through Bluetooth LE if you're using an app or a Dash app that happens to support it. But the more exciting thing that I've found with it is, or the more exciting thing for me, is that it does also add a Wi-Fi capability in. And this is something I've been playing around a little bit more with recently. I don't particularly like the Dash apps that are out there. There's a couple of them that are very good, but the whole idea of having to use a separate Dash app kind of irritates me. Not irritates me, but I don't like it so much because it requires you having the OS that's supported, with it be it Android or iOS, and actually being able to boot an OS and start the app. Yeah, I've always thought that there should be a slightly better solution to this. Pardon me. So what I've been playing around with is having a system where we can simply plug one of these boards in. And this, by the way, will be available to any other board designers. If you want to pop the header on your board, you can simply drop one of these in and you'll get all the features of it. What I've been playing around with, though, is a Wi-Fi based Dash. So what I'm going to do is just pull this back. Switch back here. Yeah, just for clarity, you can use the USB-C port on the ESP32, but only for talking to the ESP32 itself. It's not used for talking or interfacing to the ECU side of things. That said, the plan will be for the Dropbear V2s to have a USB-C port on the external side. So actually, look back here. So you can see there that just drops in there. That's a really good question, actually. This cable that's used here, this little adapter cord that runs from the outside, those are all micro USB in the Dropbear V1. I'm getting a stack of those made with USB-C on the external side, so that will be a USB-C connector here. I do have a stack of these already, so the first few that come out, they might be micro USB, sorry. I might offer the micro USB ones for, I don't know, $10 cheaper or something. But we'll see. But ultimately, the idea is that these will be USB-C on the output for the Dropbear V2. Can I post the battery info after this? And just in terms of the battery, like the part number for the battery, Gwyneth, that I can certainly do. You know what? Let's look it up because we can. That's the battery cell, and it was a. Yeah. think it's a 20 mil battery. I remember 12 mil battery. So it will be designed, there you go, for a 1216, 1220 or a 1225 coin cell battery. Is it watertight? It's not completely watertight, no. I have some little seals that I use with these boards, but they haven't been completely watertight. You can spray them with a hose, you can you can splash fluids all over them, that's fine, but they are not fully submersible water sealed. They will let in a very, very small amount of water if you fully submerge them, unfortunately. So I don't want to say they're fully waterproof, no. Like I said, if you installed them under a hood or a bonnet and they happen to get hit with fluid, they would very, very likely be absolutely fine, but they just can't be fully submersed. Why can't an ESP32 be used to make an ECU? That's a really good question. It's a question that comes up an awful lot. I will talk about that in a little bit, but I want to get to just showing off something else first. So this little Wi-Fi board, I have connected it here now. Let me just plug this whole setup back into my test bench here. Ooh, I can get the damn cable in. Okay, so that's powering up. Okay, so most of the work I've been doing on this little chip has been on the back end side of things to make sure that the Bluetooth connectivity works, and that seems to be working fine for the moment. But also creating a Wi-Fi backend that is useful and stable for people to interface with. Now, I stress that what I'm about to show you is very, very, very early days in terms of front end, but let's see if this is going to work. Cool, okay. So this is now loading on my network, so not over USB or anything like that. Is loading a basic dash that's running off that little ESP32 board that I just showed you. It's just using a basic RPM loop here, but it is attached to an ArduStim, so I can twiddle all the knobs and get responses on the other gauges as well. I've only set up 4 gauges here, but it's pumping out all of the data off the ECU in JSON format via server-side events, so it can be accessed really easily, and you can write whatever front end you want. This is just a toy front end for the moment. I am not a front end person. I cannot do front ends. I've got a mate of mine who's offered to take a look and potentially work on an actually suitable front end. But for now, this is something to get started with, and it shows that the back end is working nicely. It makes it though very, very simple for someone who maybe has a bit of familiarity with HTML and CSS to be able to create a front end, because it's all just there in web format, ready to go. So this is more the vision that I see as a dash. And if people want web interfaces for tuning, sure, want app interfaces for tuning, absolutely, go nuts. That's probably never going to be what this is. But purely as a dash front end, all you need is a browser. You can run it on a laptop, you can run it on a tablet, you can run it on a phone. All of them will work just fine. And it's a little bit simpler and it's a little bit more lightweight than having to have a separate app. Pardon me, I'm a bit croaky this morning. This is the joys of doing an 8 a.m. live stream, which is a terrible time for it because I don't even get to sit down and watch the F1 qualifying this morning. Terrible. All right. The flip side of this, or the other side of this, the other benefit that it has, and we get to the slightly interactive portion of this this live stream, is that being a web interface, you can access it via standard IP methods. Now, in this case, if if we're going to try and probably crash this poor little unit, but if you're in front of a PC or your phone, if you go to gauges.speeduino.com, you should be able to access this dash as well. I suspect it's going to be limited on the number of clients that it can handle at a given time, and you know the frame rate might drop out a little bit as more and more clients connect, but that should be something that multiple people can connect to regardless of where you happen to be at the time. So feel free to have a crack at that. It doesn't save your dash or anything like that at the moment, but you can, you know, have a play around with what's there. Hopefully the oh no, we've crashed. I wonder how many people connected before that happened. I think it's got a hard limit of 8 clients at a time. I wasn't actually sure, and I hadn't been able to reproduce it myself. No, it looks like it's choked out with too many people, unfortunately. Oh, what a shame. That's really interesting, though. I'd had 4 clients connected concurrently here. Let me just reboot it. And it had been working fine, but I wonder how many people just tried to hit it at once. I figured that was probably going to happen. A crash there was almost inevitable, I think. Yeah, interesting to see. Back up and running. Yeah, back up and running now until it chokes again. This is just a little network chart down the bottom, by the way. Oh, you can't really see it. I'm covering it up, but yeah, a fun little experiment, as you say, and nothing more than that. Yeah, it is absolutely DDoSing this poor little ESP32. Man, everybody just smashed it into non-existence. That is a bit amusing. It's amusing for me, if nothing else. So yeah, look, this isn't meant as a full-on dash. This is just a little front-end experiment. But the idea will be that if I can get the back end locked in, and it seems to be pretty good now, provided how many people are on the fuse? 92 people. Don't try and hit it at once. It's fine for 3 or 4 people to connect to all at once. Then that seems to work absolutely fine. The front end, I hope, or the intent is that once you've got it loaded, you can simply point it at a different front end and it will download the front end files that somebody else may have produced, and you can load up a different dash. Simple as that. It's all, the front end is all just standard HTML, JavaScript, and CSS. There's nothing more to this front end than that. It's all very, very standard and very, very straightforward to create a new dash. So let your imagination run wild. I've said this before, but I'll say it a million times. I'm not a front end person. It's my head doesn't work for it. So I'm not going to be the right person to do that. But if web interfaces and a web dash is your kind of thing, absolutely have at it. Yeah, that's still working. I think everybody gave up, which is probably fair. Let me just catch up with the comments for a second. Yeah, cool. So a lot of people have played with ESP32s, I know. They're a pretty a well understood product. The little ESP32 C3, the C3 and the S3 are a completely different chip to the old ones. So they've been going through a bit of a teething period with their libraries by the looks, but it seems to have settled down a bit and seems to work fairly well now. Okay, to jump back to the question, why not use an ESP32 as the for the ECU itself? honestly, they're just not suited at all. They're really, in a lot of ways, they're simply not suitable. They don't have enough timers, and they certainly don't have enough I/O. In particular, they don't have enough analog I/O. Could you do it? Absolutely, you could, but you would need to add in a lot of external chips to make it happen. You'd have to have a separate analog to digital chip on there and communicate via SPI or something like that. You would probably have to add a SPI based or I2C based digital I/O controller, because there's just not enough digital I/O either. And you really don't have enough timers on these things. The way the Speeduino firmware is written, it requires a decent number of timers and timer channels, one per fuel and ignition output. Now, most modern MCUs that are designed for this type of work, so the modern STM32s, the Teensy, all of those, they've got stacks. They've got loads of timers. The ESP32 isn't designed for that kind of work. It's designed to be a little IoT network Bluetooth type appliance, and for that it's brilliant. It does that very well. That's where the focus is, but it's really not suitable for this fast and high numbers of digital and analog I/O. It just unfortunately doesn't quite work. And it's the same for the Raspberry Pi 2040 a little bit as well. I would have loved to use a Raspberry Pi 2040. Those little chips are very, very impressive, particularly for the price. They're very, very powerful and very, very impressive, but unfortunately they're just not. They're in the same boat. They're a little Internet of Things type network connected chip. That's what they do, and they do it very, very well. But they're not suitable for an ECU. Yeah, Yoshidas, I hope I've got your name right there. That's exactly the idea. I want to get the back end on this little thing working solidly. And as soon as the back end is done, you can load the firmware onto it once, and then it can download it can download front ends from wherever. And you won't need to update the actual firmware on the device. It'll be able to just load in different front ends from wherever it wants to get them. Capable higher crank and angle resolution. This is the tricky one, because it's hard to do that and keep the firmware unified. It's maybe something I can have a look at. Yeah, what about a bare metal Raspberry Pi Pico? Yeah, that was the other option that I did look at for this. The reason I went with this little ESP32 is because you get that Bluetooth and Wi-Fi in such a tiny little package. With the Raspberry Pi, you need to add on an extra chip for Wi-Fi. And it was just becoming physically a little bit too big on the board. Yeah, so I've tested this with Real Dash. I haven't tested it with MS Droid. I'm not sure if MS Droid supports BLE yet or not, but this works brilliantly via Bluetooth as an interface chip. So ignoring all of this fancy Wi-Fi based dash, it will happily work as a Bluetooth bridge, and it will connect the Drop Air V2 into apps like Real Dash if you prefer to use Real Dash. That works totally fine. Cool. If I've missed your question on chat, please post it again. I've tried to catch up, but I've only got a fairly small view of the chat window, so hopefully nothing has skipped through. Why not use a Portenta H7? Again, it's another one I looked at, but nothing quite had the combination of extremely small size, which this does have, and Wi-Fi and Bluetooth built in, all in one go. So that was why I settled on this one. There were a heap of different chip options out there that I did look at, but ultimately it was mainly the size and the features of this one that were the deciding factor. Cool. So that's the Drop Bear V2 and the little sideboard that goes with it. I'm hoping to, in terms of a release on those, this has had a public beta, or a small number of those went out. Everything seems to be fine. We've not been able to find any faults with those that I've seen come up. What I might do is do a small initial batch of about 50 of these very, very soon. I'm working with one of my partners in the US to do a very large batch of these, or a much larger batch of these than have been available recently. But we've got to coordinate the logistics of getting, cases and connectors and everything ready to go. There are a few different components to it. We've got to have the Teensy, we've got to have the case, we've got to have the USB cable, we've got to have the map card, and all the connector sets ready to go. So there are a few moving pieces that we've got to get right on this before we do it at scale. I remember the first time when I ordered the cases for the first lot of Drop Bears, I somewhat naively came into this and I ordered 1,000 of these ECU cases, and they rocked up on multiple pallets at my home, because I didn't have the workshop at that point, of course. And these pallets weighed, I think they were 400 kilos each or something, just full of ECU enclosures, and it kind of, I hadn't really thought that one through. So I had to break those pallets down and move them box by box. But it's a little bit more coordinated and a little bit more knowledgeable this time around for how we're going to do that. I've got the new workshop, which, it's just amazing. So a big thank you to everyone who's helped support the project, because that's what it's sort of meant I can do. And I can just get access to so much more space there. I can get multiple pallet loads delivered to the workshop, and it'll make life a lot easier. So that's great. Catch up. Gervin, yeah, the Teensy 4.1 version has the existing CAN transceiver on the board. So the Teensy 3.5 didn't have a CAN transceiver integrated on board either. It could talk CAN protocol, but it still needed the transceiver to be there. That was on the Drop Bear V1. It's on the Drop Bear V2 as well. So it's the same capabilities between the two boards. How is the Bluetooth reception with the case closed? Surprisingly good. I don't have a Bluetooth connection at the moment. You can see... hold on a second. Can I move myself here? Yeah, I'll put myself up there for a moment. You can see this little chart down in the corner. That's the speed that the updates are coming through at. So it does bounce around a little bit, but anywhere between about 25 and 60 reads per second. If I put the lid of the case on the Drop Bear, so it's now fully enclosed in metal, it makes basically no difference that I've been able to see. If a million people hit this at this particular moment, it will fall over. But case on, case off seems to make very little difference. They are an cast alloy case, so that probably helps that they're not a ferrous metal, they're not a steel or anything like that. They're not that thick. I don't know what they would be, maybe 4 mil thick. But it seems to have very little impact, which is good. Samuel, that's a good point. Yeah, I forgot to mention that. Some of these, the STM32 boards and the Teensy boards can do a few more PWM channels as well. Yeah, so they can do PWM fan as well as VVT1 and VVT2 at the same time, plus PWM water meth injector if you happen to want that too. The limiting factor on the V0.3 and V0.4 is purely the number of timers that we have. So there are... Geez, my memory's fading here. I think my memory says there's about 16 total timer channels available to us on the mega boards. 9 of them go to to the fuel and ignition themselves. Then you've got idle control, you've got a system timer, you've got 2 system timers actually, and a few other bits and pieces. So you quickly run out of timer channels. Maybe it's not 16, it might be even less than 16. But yeah, unfortunately the limiting factor on the mega boards for PWM is the number of timer channels that we have. Eduardo, will Speeduino ever control direct injection? Probably not. There are no plans for it at this stage anyway. From the firmware side, it's not that difficult. You have to have closed loop fuel pump control or fuel pressure control, which is possible, but not there today. But on the hardware side, it's much more difficult. The drivers and the hardware circuitry required, something that I know is complicated, but don't know enough about to actually put a circuit together yet. So someone might do it. If someone wants to put together the hardware, I'm willing to look at the firmware side of things, but it's not something I'm probably going to play with. And I don't have a car to test on either, is the other thing. Dual fuel, yes, there are dual fuel maps that can be switched over. You can switch via a programmatic rule, or you can switch via a physical switch on the dash. What else? Knock sensor, maybe we'll make knock sensor and where that's gotten to a topic for another day. What I will say though is that the next feature release of the Speeduino firmware will have a knock interface system in it for use, and I want to really stress this, it's for use with an external knock controller, something like a Plex or a Tuner Nerd type device. You can plug one of those in and take the external feed from those, and there will be knock control based on that in the next feature release. It's something I've been having to play around with. The last about 3 or 4 weeks ago I was playing with that, so that will be there, but I really want to stress it's for use with an external knock controller, and eventually that will be what Speedy Knock probably is, if I ever get there with finding some time to work on that. But that will be coming, but you will need to have some form of external knock control. I'm testing it with the Tuner Nerd device. I really like Tuner Nerd. Go hit up Tuner Nerd, by the way. They do some really good hardware, and I'm very impressed with their devices. So it will work with one of them. But yeah, it won't work. You can't just plug a knock sensor in directly. The hardware is just not there for the moment. Is there any reason why an Ethernet port couldn't be used? Theoretically, no. Physically, it would be tough to get it to fit in the little drop bear case. And it would also be very difficult to fit in a way that was waterproof. I don't even know what a waterproof Ethernet connector does or doesn't look like in terms of a case fitting for it. It would be difficult to get it to fit inside one of these cases. There, you know, if I flick back over here. Oh, sorry, I realised I've got to disconnect everything here. I'll put it around the right way this time. Okay. Yeah, I don't know where you'd get an Ethernet connector to fit in all of that. It's pretty tight in terms of real estate in that case. So yeah, good luck. The drop bear design files are available. The V1 versions and the V2 ones will be eventually as well. But yeah, I don't know where you'd get an Ethernet one to fit. Power over Ethernet, I kind of like the idea. That's interesting. But yeah, I can't see it fitting. Yeah, I've seen Russ EFI was playing around with direct injection. Cool. I think Russ EFI do some great things. We have different design philosophies for how we want to approach these things, and that's fine. That's healthy. So I hope they keep doing their thing. I really like what they do as well. Tell us about the plans for the workshop. Look, it's nothing concrete. It's I'm going to be heading around there this afternoon actually, just to have a bit of a do a little bit of work around there. But it's really just a space that I can actually use for both testing, on vehicle testing. I just fitted last weekend. I fitted like an exhaust extraction system to the whole workshop, which is kind of cool because I was running cars in there beforehand, and it is amazing how quickly you can completely gas yourself out in a workshop like that with no ventilation. So I can actually run a car in there for a decent period of time and test. You know, in a dream world where I win the lottery, I will put a dyno cell in there as well, but you know, that's a long way in the future. For the moment, it's a space that's going to be set up for one of my 2 test cars. I've got 2 test cars that I use. One of them will be set there permanently, and will be available for me to play around with, which is cool. That's one of the 2 Cortinas. If you saw the video, there's 2 old Cortinas in there. One of which is a Mark II, which is between myself and my dad's, but it's got a fully it's a turbo fuel injected thing, so it's a really nice forced induction test bed. So I've got that, but it's also just a really nice space to be able to do ECU assembly. You know, all of these cases, for example, have 2 holes machined in them. One larger hole for the USB connector, one smaller hole that gets drilled for the map connector. It sounds like a small thing, making 2 holes in cases, and it is, until you've got 500 of them to do, and it just takes up space. And I've done all of those in my little home shed up to this point, and there's just wasn't enough room. So the workshop gives me space where I've got, you know, racking, and I can store things on racks and actually do proper assembly in a space that works. So it's going to be just so much nicer for me, particularly trying to move into bigger batches of ECUs. Yeah, look, that is a Grap saws. I hope that's your name. Yeah, you could use a different port. You don't have to use RJ45 for Ethernet. That is absolutely true. Yep. Speeduino, how about the traction controller? That's the traction controller from Tuner Nerd. I assume you're talking about there. I haven't played with it. I haven't seen it really that much. I didn't actually know that even such a thing existed. Maybe, yeah. If it simply has an interface like that, then maybe we could look at something like that as well. Yep. I really haven't played with it at all, so I can't comment much on it. So how are stock levels? Yeah, look, stock levels is always a challenge. At the moment, you know, I'm selling mostly, yeah, the Miata MX-5 plug-and-play boards and V4 kits and things like that. All the focus for me around hardware and stock is going to be building up these drop air V2s and getting them to a level that is achievable. So it might be a quick short run initially, just to, you know, almost like a larger public beta of maybe 40 or 50 boards, we'll see. Or maybe we just dive straight into a production run. Like I said, I've got a whole bunch of micro USB-C connectors and things to use up, so we'll see. But the idea is with the drop bears to get into some decent volume and have constant stock levels. I know stock has been a problem. Yeah, it's been a challenge for me to figure out that whole stock side of things. The 2 distributors that I have, amazing, right? So yeah, if you're in the US or the UK, I absolutely urge you to go check those guys out. Yeah, it's a challenge for all of us to keep the stock in and keep the designs up though. So we're working on it is the short answer. Do the drop V2s have an onboard wideband O2 controller? No, they don't, and that's by choice. Philosophically, I prefer an external wideband controller. I think it's a nicer way to go. I know a lot of people will tell me how wrong I am on that, and that's fine. But yeah, I prefer an external wideband controller and an external connector in particular. The connector situation with widebands is an interesting one. But yeah, for the moment, no, it doesn't have an onboard or pluggable controller. Is there an intended generic use faceplate for the V4? Not really. Let me show you something. This is an ancient old project of mine. This never really went anywhere, but this is a drop-in interface board for the V0.4. The difficulty was that I could never quite get it to fit inside one of the standard Hammond cases. So that's one of the standard Hammond cases, which is what the V0.4 is designed to go into, and does go into. That's what they work with. The problem is I could never quite get the whole thing to fit height-wise. Once you start adding the Mega on the bottom of the V0.4, and this, the ECU board itself, then this one, then the connector, it never quite worked. I'm happy to release the design files for these if someone wants to make them. It is a reasonably decent connector. It's a, what is that? I think it's a 40 pin or a 38 pin version of what's used on the drop bear. And I did a separate version of these with that plug in the middle. It was offset a little bit just so it avoids, it doesn't hit on a couple of the components on the V0.4. The cutout here is for the power connector on the V0.4, but that's not, you don't actually need to manually connect anything in there. So yeah, look, if anyone's interested, I can drop one of those on. This added, these circuits down here were adding a VR conditioner on, so when you plug the whole thing in, it dropped straight on and you got a VR conditioner at the same time. You could do it without this part, that would be fine, and you just don't have a VR conditioner if you don't happen to need it. But that was sort of the intent behind that board. Yeah, delving into the Museum of Speeduino artifacts, absolutely. You have no idea how big that museum is. There are so many different little side projects and side quests and things that I've played with that sort of never went anywhere, and I never really talked about because they were unfinished products. But yeah, that is a deep museum. What have I missed? The main focus of the project? Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know if it really has a main focus exactly. You know, I just keep working on the firmware and adding new features as I see fit. There was a kind of inflection point on the project, maybe 4 or 5, or maybe 4 years ago, where it did everything I ever wanted it to do for my own use. Right? I started it to play around with and have an ECU for my MX-5. It grew way bigger than anything I ever sort of envisioned. Actually, I mean, originally it was for go-karts, but it went past that pretty quickly. Yeah, this isn't something that I'm doing because I need an ECU or I need a feature for my car anymore. All of the features I personally need are way catered for, way deep in the past. So it's really just a matter of keeping on with things that other people want to see, and making making it into a little bit of a commercial operation as much as possible. It's not my full-time job. I have another job that I work, so this is still very much a side project or a hobby thing, I guess, a little bit for me. But it's one that consumes quite a bit of time, to be fair. I just keep plugging away at the firmware and doing these little side type projects because they interest me, right? I enjoy the process. I enjoy the project. I don't think it has a strategic direction as far as, what we're going to focus on next. We work on what people want to see, and the more people ask for one thing, that's the thing that gets the focus. That's simple. Can the Max 9926 VR conditioner place be right on the board on the next version instead of stacking it? That's for the V0.2, V0.4, I assume. That's probably what this board is. That's, this IC1 here. Is it IC1, K1, whatever I labeled it. IC1 down here. That is a Max 9926 IC. The difficult part with making it stackable or on board is that the majority of the V0.4 boards that go out now are through hole and are assembled by hobbyists, tinkerers, people who do it themselves. I've hand soldered a bunch of Max 9926 chips in my life. It's not fun. They're pretty small. It's not a great thing to do, and most people, to be brutally honest, won't be able to do it successfully. So that's a tricky one. On the surface mount version of the V0.4, absolutely, we could chuck it on. But yeah, the through-hole version is a little bit trickier. Focus equals stock. Yeah, probably a good point. Yep. Yeah, point taken. The pinout has can and high low. So the can high and low is for use with external devices, not so much scan tools, but interfacing with external dashes, for example. The main support there is with BMW and VAG dashboards. You can plug the can high and low in, and you can get your can dash readings straight off the board, and that seems to work relatively well. It now also supports the Russ EFI can wideband controller, which is pretty nifty. That's a great little unit, by the way. I think they've done a fantastic job on that. So not so much for scan tools, it's not a diagnostic interface, but it's there for interfacing with other devices. Yeah, maybe kits with some pre-soldered parts on them for SMD, that's another option, but then you've got to ask the question, well, if you're going to put some pre-soldered surface mount devices on, then why not just do a full surface mount V0.4, which already exists? So swings and roundabouts, I guess. Yeah, and that's a good point, that the Max 9926 is not always the best VR conditioner to go with. There are some setups where a simpler one is needed, particularly the nightmare Toyota ones that have a shared ground on two VR connectors. That one's a pain, and that will never work with a 9926. But yeah, it is very difficult to have one solution that works in every single case. Yep, in every single scenario. Check Craigslist for a used pick and place machine. I've got a sort of colleague or a distant-ish friend of mine, Jonathan Oxer, who I think he actually streams at this time on a Sunday morning Australian time as well, who does a lot of electronic stuff, and he actually has one of the Drop Air V2 betas for his son. I was chatting with him a few weeks ago when he popped up to Ballarat. He has like DIY pick and place machines that are incredible, very, very impressive. So if anyone's interested in that, check out a guy by the name of Jonathan Oxer, Superhouse. He goes by. External knock detection like the KS3. That's a good question. What does the KS3 have as an output? That's the Formula One. A good question on the Formula. Theoretically should work if it has an output, but I need to dig into it a little bit more. I don't know. Does the Formula have proper knock windowing and everything? I don't know. I'll have to look into that one. Yeah, shared ground VR sensors are an absolute nightmare, Servo. Oof, they're crazy.
Any ideas?
Cool. I think I've caught up with chat. I don't think I've missed too many questions that were directed at me there. That was really all I probably wanted to cover today. Showing off what was going on with the Drop EV2. I'm happy to run through sort of the circuits in there if anyone's interested in diving into a schematic level. It is very similar in most regards to the Drop EV1 though, and those files are available on GitHub if anybody wants to check them out. Yeah, it's been good to do one of these live streams again though, so maybe I'll have to get back into them a little bit more if people are interested. If there's any topics you actually want me to yak on about, I'm more than happy to look at that as well. If there's topics for videos you want me to do, yeah, by all means sing out. Once the Drop EV2 reaches a production level, I'll certainly do a video on that, showing everything off about that. But yeah, I think that's really all I sort of wanted to cover off in today's stream. If you've got any final questions, fire them away now, and I'll see if I can answer those. But otherwise, we'll probably think about wrapping this up. Yeah, dinner time in the US, man. It's breakfast time here. I've been surviving on a coffee, and that's been about it for me. Drive-by-wire, yeah. Ugh. Not something I'm really reluctant to touch from a liability point of view. Years and years ago, probably, God, when would it have been? Maybe 13 or 14 years ago. So about the same time I started Speeduino, I decided to build a drive-by-wire controller for actually my old Cortina, one of the ones that's in the shed now. And building that was an interesting experience in learning how much you don't know and how scary safety critical features can be. Building an ECU that can blow up a motor is one thing. Nobody wants to blow up a motor, of course, but that's one thing. Having a system that can potentially seriously impact people's safety, that's a whole nother one. And getting anything wrong in that, yeah, once you dig into what has gone into OEM systems for drive-by-wire, you realize just how much you don't know about safety critical systems. Now, I probably know a lot more now, but I'm still very, very nervous from a liability point of view about drive-by-wire. I know other people do it, and that's great. There's plenty of drive-by-wire controllers out there. I get it. That's fine. Happy for those people to do it. But yeah, it's something that terrifies me a little bit, to be honest. Technic Nerd, yeah, I'll have to look at the formulas. I just haven't looked at those particular devices too much. My focus has been on the Plex and the Tuner Nerd ones because I know they're good. I don't personally own a Plex to try with, but I got a loaner of a Plex and that worked really well. I do have a Tuner Nerd one and that works brilliantly. I'm a big fan of that particular product. I think they're doing knock detection the right way. It's the way I wanted to do it with Speedy Knock, and I will one day get to work on that project, I swear. But yeah, I guess my concern with knock is there are a lot of knock hardware systems out there that do knock badly, really, really badly. And I'm not knocking them for the sake of knocking them and saying that they're garbage and I can do better and all that sort of thing. But I think what they produce is barely of any use, and in fact can be detrimental rather than helpful, because they're just not looking at knock the right way, and they're not looking at enough variables to be able to determine knock. My 2 cents only. I don't know what the formula does. I haven't looked closely enough at that. But yeah, you've got to be doing it right when it comes to knock. You've got to have variable knock thresholds throughout the RPM range. You've got to have tunable detection frequencies, which most do. That's an easy one. And you've got to have knock windowing. That's the critical one. You've got to have an angle window that looks for knock on a given cylinder. If you're not doing variable knock thresholds throughout the RPM range, and you're not doing degree-based knock windowing, then I don't think you're doing knock right. My 2 cents, but yeah. Oh, 1:15 in the morning. I feel for you. It's difficult to try and pick a time zone that works well for everyone. So maybe I can do one, a little bit later, or probably a little bit later, to get the Europe guys attending a little bit of a better time. But then that knocks out the US. So it's sort of, you can't win for everyone when it comes to time zones, unfortunately. All right, cool. I think we might wrap it up there for the day. Thank you, everyone, for coming along. I'm still astounded how many people join onto these things. We've had 80 or 90 people for most of today, which blows me away. So thank you so much all for the support. I cannot thank you enough. It's great to see that there's people out there interested in this stuff. And if you want to hear more of me rambling on about anything Speeduino related, or anything that I'm doing project wise, by all means, let me know. Let me know in the comments. Let me know in Discord. Trying it on Facebook. I'm not great at getting on catching everything that happens on Facebook, because the volume there is huge. But grab me on Discord, drop something in the comments if you want to see another video. But otherwise, I hope you have a great night, great day, wherever you happen to be. And thank you so much. It really blows me away that there's this much interest in the project. So thanks for being there, and thanks for all the support throughout the years. Thanks, everyone.